Hi friends, welcome to Law Chat with Girja. I'm Girja Bhargav Patel, your host for Law Chat, and I am so excited for you to join us today. I have some amazing guests on Law Chat, and they're here to share their experiences and entrepreneurial journey with us, and through their storytelling, mentorship with us, because that is the whole point. We are all entrepreneurs and we're all on a journey, and learning from one another is the best way for us to move forward in our journey as well. And I have amazing guests who are so willing and ready to share their stories with us, their challenges and their victories and their achievements, and also their mindset. I just can't wait to share that with you, and I also just can't wait to have that conversation with them. It's such a privilege to have each and every one of them here with us today, and also it's such a privilege to have you listening in and tuning in. So let's dive in to Law Chat with Girja.
Hi friends, welcome to Law Chat. One of the most common questions I get is, how do I protect my content? How do I protect my brand? How do I protect my business? And today I have a very special guest. He's a fellow lawyer, attorney, podcaster as well. And he is going to be sharing with us his knowledge, his wisdom, but also his journey on how do you create a brand for yourself as well, and how you develop an industry for your own practice, whether you're working in a company or whether you're working on your own. And so welcome to the show, Trevor. I'm so happy to have you on with us today. Honestly, I'm so happy because I know that you have so many gems to share with us, but just talking to a fellow lawyer, I just sometimes get really excited. I feel like sometimes I'm all alone all the time. So,
well, Girja, I'm thrilled to be here. Thanks so much for having me, and I'm excited for our conversation as well.
Yeah. So I was, before I start any or have somebody on my show, I do a little research and I kind of prepare myself because I'm a super preparer. And I was kind of looking at your background, and you actually did physics. Mm-hmm. And so did you know that you wanted to be a lawyer, or did that just become happenstance? How did that journey happen?
Yeah, so I really look back and I don't really understand why, but when I was in fourth grade, I was on a family vacation in Boston with my family for my uncle's wedding. And we went through a bus tour through Harvard Square. And I looked at my parents and was like, you know what? I'm going to be a lawyer someday. And I think I'll go to Harvard. And they're like, oh, okay, son, sit down and just don't bother us. And for some reason, that commitment stuck in my head. And through high school, through college, it continued to be kind of a driving idea in my mind. I was going to be a lawyer. And so, I did things like mock trial in high school, and I did internships with a local law firm, and started undergrad, was still leaning towards doing law school. And so I had a great pre-law program at my undergrad, and I knew I was going to do that because this is still where I wanted to head. But somewhere in the back of my mind, I was like, okay, you're going to spend, all of this schooling, all of this time focusing on a career. You have no idea really what it's going to be like. You may hate it. So let's do something else just in case you actually hate law school. And so I've always loved math, never liked doing math for the sake of doing math. So physics seemed like a great kind of backstop because it's actually applied math, and had a fantastic physics professor in high school. So that all kind of led me down the path of, you know what, I'm going to go to law school, but let's do this as undergrad as well.
Wow. So my thought process was very similar to yours too. I knew very early on that I wanted to be a lawyer, and I did all those extracurricular activities that I think would have boosted my legal career, except for physics. Physics was absolutely not part of my ammo. I was like, oh, what is this? I don't understand this physics stuff. But I did business undergrad then. So I did finance. So I was like, yeah, same thing. Oh, it's going to be a great backup plan if something happens.
Yeah, exactly. So now we have all these skills that, at the time may not have seemed like it was actually going to be applied to a legal career, but I don't know about you, but for me, the physics still kind of played in directly to where my legal career ended up. So I'm sure the same with your business background.
And actually, you're right. By very unknowingly, that's happened. And it's really interesting that you say physics, because when I started law school, I did not know that you needed a technical background to do patent law, science, engineering, whatever, something like that. And so of course, if you didn't do that undergrad, you kind of missed the boat. You couldn't become a patent attorney. And so I think that must have been, did you know that when you did physics, or was this also just...
I didn't. Another one of those things, I look back and I'm just shocked about the lack of my awareness about law school, about the practice of law. But no, I had no idea that you had to have an undergraduate degree in technology to become a patent attorney. But once I got to law school, and people were like, "Oh, you've got a physics background. You have to do patents now. That's the only kind of logical choice for you to do." And so I started to look into patents because of that, and took a patent class in law school. But it turned out I didn't really like doing patent work. I didn't like the materials. I didn't like it. So I was like, okay, what's close to this? What's next? And ended up taking a trademark class that I absolutely loved with just a wonderful professor at UNC Chapel Hill. And that kind of kicked off the process to where I'm at today.
Wow. And so what does your practice focus on, or like where has your expertise focused on the past years?
Yeah, so it's kind of been a progression because kind of that trademark class that I took kind of kicked off conversations with her about what a practice might look at. That professor connected me with my first job out of law school, and I ended up doing straight trademark applications and prosecutions at a big law firm. But then kind of along the lines, it was just like, well, I have this ability to get this patent qualification. It would be a little silly not to go back and do it. So about 3 years into practice, ended up getting patent qualified and became a registered patent attorney and started doing some patent applications as well. But really kind of maybe 5 years into my career, I felt like I wanted to do more in addition to just the application process. I really wanted to get some exposure to enforcement and litigation. But at the firm I was at the time, I kind of was in a track and it didn't involve the litigation. So I kind of stepped back and joined an IP litigation boutique and did that for a couple of years. So grateful that I did it, but realized I absolutely hated litigation. So, everything's a learning experience, and that in itself was a very helpful experience because now I know that was not what I wanted for my career. Because I found that even in the midst of litigation, what I wanted to do was take party A and party B and help them figure out what's in their both in their best interest. How do we make this a win-win for both sides? And then it turns out that's really corporate law. That's business. That's helping people find transactions. And so that's where I ended up in my practice today, where I still am an IP specialist, but I really help kind of with protection and commercialization for startup and entrepreneurial companies as they look to grow and hopefully have a successful exit someday with their company, but focusing really on the IP side of it.
Yeah. I think, it's really interesting because while litigation was a great experience, but I think it also helps a person become a better transactional attorney because it truly helps them know what will actually go to court, what will kind of stand, or the little tricks of the trade for court. So you can kind of prevent that in the beginning. So it kind of doesn't even get there in the court also.
It's a fantastic point because the litigation that I was involved with primarily in the time I was there related to a contract dispute for a software company.
Yeah.
And it was about, we ended up just arguing over just one paragraph within a contract for years and years and years on end. And coming out of that, now I do a ton of software licensing and contracts for our companies, but I have that mentality. I have that thought process. I know what it's going to sound like when two unrelated attorneys are trying to argue what we meant with this paragraph. And it's daunting, but it's certainly informative as well.
Absolutely. Like I always, whenever I'm drafting contracts, I'm always preparing them to think like, how would this hold up in court? Or what would this be interpreted as? And of course, there's no black or white answer. There's always gray matter, but you can at least kind of go with some experience and some wisdom from past experiences. So
yep.
That's awesome. So I know that you just said that you kind of focus on startups and companies that have growth projections and exit strategies. How did you get into this niche? Because the startup industry is pretty brand new. It's nothing that existed even like 20 years ago, really, the way it is now.
Yeah. So, actually, it has to do with the firm that I ended up joining after the IP litigation boutique, because that has been their focus for now. I guess it's our 25th anniversary this year. And they had been focusing, and it's been a focus of our founder, Fred Hutchison, since he started the firm, really. And so I ended up working on a litigation kind of with this firm while I was at the IP litigation boutique and became aware of what they were doing. The clients that they were serving was super appealing to me. And so when an opportunity came across to kind of take over their trademark practice, I knew this was the group that I wanted to work with. And it certainly has been because, as you know, kind of working with these young entrepreneurs, with these smaller companies, you really Their passion is fantastic. Their drive to build the company is great. They really are dedicated to what they're doing. And I'm not saying that people in huge corporate enterprises aren't either, but it's just there's this kind of a flavor of a company that we work with that's just exciting to do day in and day out.
Right. And so you now are pretty much focused on startup companies. And what does that mean? What is that startup company? What does that mean? It's a buzzword, but what does it mean?
Yeah. So as I think about it in a way, it's really somebody who is looking to form a company and most often has the idea that they're going to take in an outside investment. We do work with companies that have, bootstrapped their business. So they're kind of funding themselves off of their own revenues. But a lot of the companies that we're focusing on helping want to take on some sort of outside investment at some point in time. So they've got an idea, they've got a business plan, they've got maybe some initial product and initial customers, and they're looking to build that out until they can take in, either initial rounds of funding from angels or from family members, and then build it up to a point where they're really interesting to a venture capital investment and can take on some pretty serious money at that point in time.
That's awesome. And like, this is something that you were like, this company with this law firm was already practicing in Hutchison PLLC. That's where you work, right?
Yep.
And so they've already been practicing this, but how did you come in and say, I got this? And how did you create that space for yourself?
Yeah, it's interesting because it was, the firm that I work with, I would say maybe about 80 to 90% of the folks there do roughly this similar practice. So they're doing corporate work, they're doing financing, they're doing M&A and those types of transactions. So I came in as really a specialist here, saying, you've got these companies, you've got these folks who are looking to take on money and to have an exit. But until they get to that point, they've got specific operational needs. They need to be able to protect their IP. They need to be able to commercialize that IP through good contracts. And I knew that was something that I could come in and bring and kind of help supplement this existing practice that was already there.
I love that. And I love how you're saying, make it operational and also make it transactional through a contract and commercialize it. Because I often think that a lot of times, like you said, startup companies or brand new businesses, even old businesses, I'm going to say, like people who just don't know how important it is to include legal as part of the strategy rather than as part of just the cure. Mm-hmm. And so how are you doing that in your business and in the way you practice law?
Yeah, I mean, it's an interesting conversation because I think it's, especially when working with kind of these newer companies, it's always going to be a balance between finding the right amount of legal protection to make sure that you are protecting your company versus what are you able to kind of fund at the point in time, what's appropriate for the size of your company, what's appropriate for the risk that you may be facing, and finding that balance. And so, what I like about our practice is that we have an ability to kind of be flexible and structure and realize that a company on day one may not be able to have the same legal budget that they will at 10 years down the road. But we want to work with the company from day one through year 10 and beyond. And so we kind of look to structure it that way because, as these companies need legal protection as much or more on day one than they do kind of 5 years down the road. And so you have to be there and be present to help them kind of think through, what do you have to protect now or you're going to lose it? Or what can you maybe kick down the road for a little bit until you have more funding and then look to protect it at that time. And I think that's an important conversation to have with, the founder, the CEO at an early stage so that they can make that kind of informed decision for their business.
I hate to interrupt this awesome conversation, but I have to stop and talk with you about the number one thing I'm asked about by entrepreneurs: contracts. They're vital to any business relationship and to protect your business. But I also know that entrepreneurs, especially when you're starting up, money is tight. But I would never want you to compromise on a strong legal foundation. So enter yourcontractbuddy.com, a website created by me with contract templates created and drafted by me and fellow industry partners. They're ready to use and easy to plug in immediately. And they are not restricted to any specific state. So yourcontractbuddy.com is sponsoring this episode, and you and your listener can get 10% off right now with code LAWCHAT. Yes, you heard me right. 10% off right now with code LAWCHAT. And now back to our awesome conversation.
And how do you educate them, or how do you express to them that this is important? Because, we can say all day long, oh yeah, it's going to protect your business and blah, blah, blah. But at the end of the day, it's kind of like, okay, you sound like a broken record. So what are some steps that you take to educate your clients about the needs for what the services that you're providing?
Yeah, sometimes I think it's a matter of talking to them about what the risk is on a practical level. So, if we're talking about a trademark and this is the name of your business, sometimes the question is, how would you feel if you see your name on somebody else's website? Are you okay with that? Would you be willing to change it? Is it not a big deal for you just to kind of change some code on your website and just swap it out? Or is that going to be traumatic to your business? If it's going to be traumatic to your business, we got to get that protected now. It's talking about, big thing these days are kind of like the online protection mechanisms that are available through sites like Amazon or social media sites where you have to be able to take it down. So the question is, what would you do if you saw somebody with a Facebook page that was using your mark and it was advertising similar services? Is that going to be troubling to you? Is that going to be a problem? Or are you focused more on kind of direct personal interaction? If it's going to be a problem, here's how you go about protecting it, and here's what those steps might look like. It's going to be a lot easier if you have that registration in place.
Absolutely. Because with the DMCA takedown that you're kind of referring to, one party can say, oh, this is mine. The DMCA, well, they'll take it down. But then if the other party's like, no, this is mine, they'll put it back up. They're not the judge or the jury of that particular content or trademark or whatever you're trying to get down. So the best way to prove it is through a registration.
That's absolutely right. And I think that's the important thing that a lot of companies need to realize and their attorneys need to educate them on, is the fact that the day of going to court and filing, the trademark infringement suit or copyright infringement suit, it's still there, it's still important. But on a day-to-day basis, your most important protection mechanisms are going to be the ability to take a DMC takedown notice to a company and have them take it down, to be able to submit a trademark infringement claim through Amazon and have them take it down. It's so much easier, so much less expensive, and so much less friction that it's a much easier way for you to protect your company.
Less expensive by so much. I mean, it's just like literally a fraction of the cost of what you would be spending in litigation.
I don't think people often realize, we think of litigation, we know it's expensive, but, there's a difference between knowing a car is expensive and, going out and buying the most expensive car that's out there. It's an order of magnitude more expensive than people expect.
Absolutely. So talking about trademarks, I kind of want to talk about the intellectual property, so which includes trademarks, copyright, patents, trade secrets. And so what I really wanted to talk about is a little bit about that. And what is your tips if someone is considering today, if a listener is like, oh, I don't know if I should trademark, what are some of your top tips on helping them figure that out?
Yeah. So as far as, I think it's important to understand that you're going to have some rights based off of just your use of it. So, that's always going to be the balance. Do I have enough protection through my common law trademark rights, or do I need to get a federal registration? And so for your listeners, and as you know, common law trademark rights are going to be limited to the geographic area in which you've used the mark. So if you're primarily a local company, you don't really have ambitions to kind of move out of this limited geographic area, you might be okay with your common law rights. But if you really have ambitions to move into other markets, you have ambitions to be a nationwide company, you really got to get that registration done as quickly as possible so that you hold your place in line and get your protection so that somebody can't kind of come in later and trump what you've built. The other conversation I have a lot, especially with regard to trademarks, is they come to me and they say, I want to register the name of my company and my logo and all of these things. I usually try to help them prioritize what's going to be the most important. What is your primary brand going out to your customers as? My recommendation is generally to file for what's called a standard characters trademark application for that primary brand. And a standard characters application provides the broadest protection for the literal element within that mark. After you've got that protection, go ahead.
What does that mean? What does that mean?
So if you think about a big name or brand like Coca-Cola. So you have the word Coca-Cola, and then you have the fancy kind of white script font that we're all familiar with. And then you have some of their logos where you have Coca-Cola on a red stamp or on a bottle or such. So what I'm saying when I say standard characters mark, get the words Coca-Cola registered as a standard characters, because that's going to protect you if you use it in typed font. It'll protect you if you use it with a logo. If you use it with different fonts, it allows you to change your logo down the road. After you've gotten that protection, you're allowed to get incremental protection for your design or your logo. But if you're prioritizing, go for that broadest protection possible. And then kind of the third level protection, what are your taglines? How long do you intend to use that tagline? Is it something that you'll use for a few years, for a month? Is it something that's going to be the identity of your company for the next 10 years?
Mm-hmm.
If it's going to be your identity for a long time, get that registration. If you plan on changing it out in a year, you're not going to have your trademark registration in a year. So don't go ahead. Don't there's no need to file
Right.
for it.
Right. So, you're saying the geographical situation, and then if you have ambitions to grow and become more national or global, but what about, the advent of internet and online businesses? It seems like everybody is national.
Mm-hmm.
You can access everybody everywhere, and there's really no geographical scrutiny at that point. So how do you, if you are that company that is primarily online and you don't
Mm-hmm.
really have a local presence per se, especially now with COVID, a lot of people are switching to digital products and digital services. So what do you do in that instance then? What was your suggestion be?
Yeah, I think in those situations, it's probably beneficial to get that registration in place because it's going to be harder for you to show what your geographic area really is. So, as I understand it, the courts and the trademark office really aren't going to assume that just because you have a website that can be accessed nationwide or around the world that you're going to have rights to it. Really, what they're looking to is where have people placed orders from? Where have you delivered
Mm-hmm.
services? Where have you intentionally directed advertising? And that's going to be hard for you to kind of demonstrate to do in some sort of a meaningful fashion. So would you rather do that to kind of demonstrate what your rights are, or just hand over a trademark registration that says, no, I have nationwide priority to this mark? And it's a
Right.
lot easier to do the latter.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. I love how your analysis is on what's easy. And it's literally always easy to register.
yep.
Okay, so switching gears to copyright.
Uh-huh.
What are do you do copyright also, or have you dabbled in it a little
I
bit?
do copyright. Yep.
And so what is so much content is being created. And
Mm-hmm.
I specifically really help the creative industry. That's where my niche is. And so I see so much content, whether it's blogs or books or courses by coaches or, photography, photograph images. What are your top tips for copyright?
That's a good question, because I think copyright is the challenging one because, again, you have certain rights based off of just having created the work. You have, more enforceable rights once you've gotten the registration. But given kind of the fluid nature of some of these works, so you talk about kind of educational courses or blog posting or any sort of written work, if they're iterating on that and changing it year over year over year, at some point in time, there's been enough changes that you need to file an additional application for that updated version. And so again, it's going to be a balancing act between getting the protection that you need for the original material and then updating that enough so that as you've made changes over time, you're still protected by what you're offering kind of 5 years down the road. So there's that as a consideration, because as you know, copyright registration is much less expensive endeavor than filing for a trademark application or filing for a patent application. So it's more manageable. But I also think the big important thing about copyright really relates back to what we were talking about before, and the ability to use the Digital Millennium Copyright Act, DMCA, to have images taken down from other sites.
Mm-hmm.
And oftentimes, if you can demonstrate prior ownership, you don't even need a registration to do that. But again, having that registration in hand is always going to be a much more effective way to either reach out to a third-party website and say this needs to be taken down, or if you need to send out that cease and desist letter and say, no, this is actually mine.
Right. I think I totally agree with you. And I always add to my analysis is, are you making money off of this?
Mm-hmm.
Is this something part of your revenue stream? And if so, you might want to just go ahead and protect it with a registration so you can have extra protection. And then you'd also be entitled to statutory protection as well once you do the registration.
Yeah, and I think the statutory protection is very important, especially for this type of content. Because so part of the analysis has to be, how likely are you to get ripped off, and what would be your recourse if you do happen to get somebody to take your material. because having to prove that you've had fewer customers come to you because somebody else has taken your content, proving direct damage, that's really, really hard, and is very, very unlikely for many of these small companies to be able to demonstrate that they've been hurt. But being able to say, I've got a registration, I'm entitled to statutory damages, these are what those statutory damages might be, that's a much more effective way to kind of reach out and get a positive resolution.
Completely agree with that. And so we've talked a lot about protecting, and we've talked about how we can actually take them to court, essentially, if something does happen. But what are some other reasons to include the intellectual property strategy in your business?
Yeah, and so, it's important for a number of reasons. One is what we've talked about, and another is kind of as you look to take on investment. So if you've got a company that's looking to take on outside investment, part of what an investor is going to look at is what is the value that the company has that I'm getting by this investment, and being able to point to the fact, no, I've taken care of my trademarks, I've taken care of my copyrights, I'm going through efforts to make sure other people can't take this value away from the company. That makes it much more, prime for investment from somebody else's perspective. You're showing that you're taking the right steps, and they have further assurances that, their investment is protected at least as much as it possibly can be. So there's I don't want to say window dressing aspect, but there's a part of making the company look appealing to outside investment. Also being able to transfer those assets, so eventually the value in your company is going to be built in part on the assets. And so as you build in, goodwill in your trademark, that's going to become valuable. And having a registration is much easier to transfer than it is to say, well, I've got some unregistered common law rights that I want to transfer over. It's going to be much easier to say, no, here's the document that says you have the right to the trademark. So it makes it much easier to transfer that value down the road.
Right. And I think that's so important. So it's protection. It is adding value to your business and to your company, making it more appealing to other investors. And plus, you can easily transfer the registrations or assign them to somebody else, which is so important, especially if somebody's trying to take over your business or you're trying to sell your business. And it really is cool because you really start honing into that CEO qualities of a business, where you're thinking about strategies, you're thinking about exit strategies also, and the growth plan of your business. And so that must be really fun to be a part of that with your clients.
It really is, because, to your point, you're thinking about, all right, what do I need to do today to sell the next contract? But what do I also need to do today so that when I have to go to investors for a Series A investment round, that I'm going to look appealing to them? And then what am I going to have to do 7 years down the road when I've taken on that investment and I actually want to sell the company? And you have to have all of those kind of, the CEO has got to have that all in their mind at the same time. And really, our role as attorneys, as counselors, is to help them avoid pitfalls that they might not be aware of. So here's the risk that you might have to consider from an IP perspective. Here are the risks from a tax perspective. Here are the risks from employment. And we're here to help you avoid any pitfalls so that you can be successful going forward.
Speaking of pitfalls, what are some common pitfalls that you see with new businesses?
Sure. I think some are, there's
so many.
There are. Some of the ones that make me the most nervous is, I found this business that I really like. I want to do exactly that. How little do I have to change about it before I can run it as my own? And that's not a good place to start from. Another common pitfall is I found it on the internet, so it's free to use. And that is
no, never.
It shouldn't start with I found it on the internet, and since I was able to use it, I must be allowed to use it.
It is such a common myth, though. I actually talked about it just last week on my solo podcast show, where no, Google does not mean fair use.
Fair use is not a catch-all. Just because it's not like The Office, right? You just call out fair use, it's somehow protected. It's really not. There's some steps that you have to take. But then kind of more on a serious side, I think, from a patent perspective, some of the pitfalls relate to the timing of your getting your protection versus when you have either provided a disclosure to the public or made a first sale of that. Because, on the patent side of things, once you've actually made a sale or made a public disclosure of the full content of what's in the patent, you can actually be foreclosed from actually having any rights. And so that's an important pitfall that people need to be aware of. And so as you get to that point of launching a product, you need to have had your conversations with the patent attorney to figure out whether you're going to be able to get protection anyway. So that's a pretty common pitfall.
even with copyright, there is a time frame that's important as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I assume you're talking about like the 3 month from initial publication.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then the sooner you do a copyright registration, the more, I don't know how to say it, but you have more of a bigger pool of money, or like a bigger option, like chances of getting a bigger judgment if something were to like a bigger recourse or a larger amount of recourse. I've totally butchered what I was about to say, but like, you know what I mean?
The point is absolutely correct. The sooner you get it, the bigger pot of money. I mean,
there you go.
It's easier to understand it that way.
Yeah. So I think timeliness is very important. And I think a lot of times people don't realize it. And they're sitting on something for so long, and then it's kind of like, well, great, let's do it now. But this is the caveat to that.
Yeah, you never want to, I don't know, you never want to have a decision taken away from you. So I always want my clients to be able to make an informed decision and say, no, this isn't in the best interest of the company to protect it, or we would like to, but we don't have the resources, so we can't do it. Rather than saying, we want to do it, oh no, we're actually statutorily barred from doing it. So those are the types of situations that you want to avoid.
Yeah, absolutely. And just kind of talking a little bit more about trademark and, doing a trademark analysis in your business. When you were helping a company do a trademark for their business, what kind of a analysis do you do to make it aligned with their business strategy? Do you know what I'm asking? Like, how do you align it with the way their business is running?
Yeah, I mean, it's an interesting question because, clearing a trademark is certainly an art as much as anything else. Because I have people come to me often and say, well, I pulled up the trademark office database. There's nothing that's identical to it. We're good to go. So let's file. And that unfortunately is not the case, because, the analysis or the standard that's used is whether or not it's likely to cause confusion. So that's going to be variations in the mark, variations in the goods and services. So there's kind of a broad-based analysis that has to happen. And so part of walking through it with a company is, again, identifying risks, both regard to severity and likely to occur. So I feel like a lot of times in the conversations that we have with companies, it's like, well, here's this use. It's identical. It's a big company. If they come after you, it's going to be a big risk to the company. And since, you're a very public company, your use is going to be public, the probability of them finding out about you is also going to be very high. So that's a high risk, high probability. Let's stay away from that. But then you get into kind of trickier situations where it could be a high risk. This is a mark that was used maybe 4 years ago, but I can't necessarily find an ongoing use right now, but the company's still out there. If they raise an objection, it's going to be hard to overcome. So it's, maybe a high risk, but maybe a lower probability that an objection is going to be raised. So you really have to kind of walk through those risk analyses and then say, at the end of the day, if the worst case scenario happened, this is what you would have to do. If a medium case scenario happened, this is what would happen. And in the best case scenario, you get your mark and everybody goes about their day and everybody's happy. So I think that's part of the analysis and part of what we try to walk through with our clients.
Right. And I think it's every time I've walked through with my clients also, it gets, I don't know, as a lawyer sometimes, and then a business owner also, I feel like, gosh, I don't want to be like, trampling over all your dreams right now while we have this conversation. But, it's also, you don't want to be wasting your time or money or energy in a situation that can get really bad, because I think a lot of people don't realize that there is a time period during the trademark process where opposition can be raised. Mm-hmm. And that is something that a lot of people don't realize that actually exists.
Yeah, or even after you got your registration, somebody could come out of the woodwork and file a cancellation action. So at each step of the process, you've got incremental more assurances that you're protected, that you're okay. But, until you're many years down the road, it's unlikely that you have absolute assurance about anything. Mm-hmm. But you kind of raise an interesting point too, because it's something that I talk about with law students and some of our associates as well, is the easiest thing as an attorney to do is to say no. No, you can't do it. No, you can't do it. But it's also probably the least effective thing for our clients, for businesses. You have to provide options. So it's, you can't do this, but maybe you can do this. Yes. Or if you do this, this is the risk. Or maybe not that, but, make this modification and you can do it here. Mm-hmm. Don't say no, say, this is the risk, or this is how you can do it. And I'm not suggesting that people give bad advice and tell people to go do things that are reckless. But really, it's about helping the business understand what the risk is and to overcome that risk.
I completely 100% agree with you, because at the end of the day, they're coming to you for expertise. They're coming to you to literally be their answer, and not a place where they have to think for their answers, although they should have the ability to make informed decisions. But I think giving a no for anything, you need to have a solution also. Have alternatives, have other options, because a no is then, okay, then what do we do then? Because they're still looking for an answer. They're still looking for some guidance.
Yep.
And so I think that's such great advice. And I think not just for lawyers, but even if you're in other professions like accountants, or even if you're a web designer, or, you know, some type of other digital product that you're providing, but having options for your clients, because they're coming to you to solve a problem at the end of the day.
Yep.
So I think that's great advice. So when I'm just going to I'm going to stop talking about IP now. We're going to talk a little bit more about you and how you have created this area for your practice, because, you know, I guess your firm has been doing it for 25 years. They've been serving this kind of an industry, but what are some changes that you're seeing in the industry? And as a lawyer, how are you keeping up with that?
Yeah, so I mean, I guess there's two parts to it. So I think there's the startup or entrepreneurial community in and of itself, and so some of the changes that we see there, you know, for historically the Southeast, you know, we're based out of Raleigh, has been a more challenging place to kind of get funding. You know, you think of big markets like Boston or Silicon Valley or New York, as, you know, it's easy for people, not easy, but it's easier for companies to have investors write checks. You know, historically in the Southeast, people were going to have to do more legwork to kind of get the same opportunities. I think that's shifting some, and I think the pandemic is going to shift that even further. There's now not as much of a bias towards these markets, and the ability to attract investors, to attract big companies to invest in these businesses has shifted over time. And so I think that's been a big change, kind of in at least the market that we're working in. You know, from an IP perspective, the changes relate to some of what we've talked about before, kind of the rise of the importance of third-party IP protection mechanisms. That's been a significant issue. The more international that even small businesses can be has been a big change, even from the start of my career. So it's easy for, you know, a company that just started in a college dorm room now to be offering services in Turkey. It's not an inconceivable thing. And that changes kind of the perspective of what you have to consider from an IP protection standpoint. You know, the rise of, you know, a lot of what I do, it relates to software. And so kind of changes relating to artificial intelligence, kind of the continued use and issues associated with the use of open source software. You know, those continue to have dynamic changes for the industry. And a lot of it really is just talking to people, talking to your customer, you know, for us, our clients. What is it that you're seeing? What is it that you're doing? You know, reading up on things. I use Twitter primarily not to post stuff about myself, but really to kind of highlight people that I want to read more about, and then kind of track down the articles that they're writing on to keep up on some of these topics.
Oh, nice. And I have Twitter, but I'm just not active on it whatsoever. Yep. So
I very rarely post anything, but I do, I'm on it. So again, to kind of read other things that people have, it's almost a data aggregator for me.
Right. I think that kind of goes down to this market research and figuring out what your market is doing, what's new, what's not new, and the shifts and changes that are happening. And it's really important for anybody to stay abreast of what's happening in the market that they're serving.
Yeah, well, and it's interesting from a kind of a career development perspective. I look back at certain junctures in my career, and it's important to identify. You can't be an expert on everything, but it's always important to identify something big that's next that is going to add value to your clients and continuing to grow in that. Because I look back at one point in time in my career, you know, they were just about to launch the new top-level domain names, and it was a big issue for a lot of our clients as far as, do we need to register? What's that going to look like? How do we handle that from a cost perspective? So I went out and tried to become an expert in that area so I could advise our customers. Then, you know, fast forward down the road, data protection starts to be a huge issue. And so when GDPR was just coming out, I was just like, this is going to be a big issue that all of our customers, clients are going to face. I need to know more about this. And so again, diving deep into it, studying it, learning more about it. So you can't pick and choose everything, but pick and choose things that are closely aligned with what you're already practicing and continue constantly to build those skills.
What great advice. And how do you dive into it? What are some ways that, I know you were saying earlier that you read articles, follow people on Twitter, but what other, or relevant people on Twitter? But
Right. You got to find the right people.
But what other ways do you really help yourself become that expert?
Yeah, well, I mean, unfortunately for us as lawyers, at some point in time, you're actually going to have to read the statute or you're going to have to read the regulations. And so I think it's helpful, especially for young lawyers to have, read somebody else's analysis of it first, maybe read 6 different lawyers' analysis of it first, get an idea of what it's trying to accomplish, and then get into it and kind of read the statute, read the regulation, and do you agree with it? Is this what the words actually mean? Maybe not. And then continue to have those conversations with other people. I think it's important to find community. So whether it's, peers, people you went to law school with, people within your law firm, clients, how are they dealing with, what do they understand this to mean? How are they dealing with the implications of it and having those conversations? So it's a lot of different moving pieces, but I think that's how you have to do it.
And that's so true. It's a lot of things that you have to look into aside from reading articles, keeping in touch with your network also. And of course, for lawyers, reading statutes and case law, subscribe to all these different case law updates. So
yeah. Well, and then we've got, continuing legal education, and sometimes those can be helpful to kind of get that broad overview before you drill down into it. Again, kind of having a context or somewhere to understand kind of outer bounds of it can be helpful, and before you dive into it deeply.
Yes, I absolutely agree with you. Well, I have really enjoyed learning a lot from you, and I'm sure everybody that's listening in also has learned tons from you as well. Now, before we end, I'd like to also ask, what is an anchor in your life? Like, what is something that you look to that holds you down when things are not working your way, or you're just, kind of flapping around. You're like, this is holding me.
Yeah. So I guess my initial thoughts to that are 2 things. One is my family. Absolutely everything that I do and kind of think about really is influencing with my family, but they're also kind of the rock coming back to me. And then the other side of that would be my faith. So I think between those 2, those will get me through the toughest times.
I love that. So I'm going to ask you a couple fun questions, just, in general. What's your favorite book, whether it's work related or not?
Okay, so that would be a vastly different answer. So kind of non-work related book, Ender's Game has always been a huge favorite of mine, which, science fiction book. I absolutely love science fiction and consume quite a bit of it, but Ender's Game has always been one of my favorite books. And then I feel like I have to offer some sort of professional or important sounding books here as well. I recently read the 4 Disciplines of Execution, I think it's called, 40X. And for people who are looking to formulate their goals and really execute on those goals, it was a fantastic framework to kind of think through that. So there's a group of guys that I've met recently who walked through that book to kind of think about it from a business development standpoint, and it was really helpful.
Oh, wow. Okay, so it's called 4DX.
Yes, the 4 Disciplines of Execution by Chris McChesney.
Perfect. Well, it's going to be in the show notes.
Perfect.
And I'll probably be putting it in my Amazon cart as well.
It is well worth the read because it's very kind of practical and systematic as far as how you approach these things.
Yeah, I love reading business books. I have a whole pile next to my bed, and I'm getting to them slowly and steadily.
Yeah, I recently got a Kindle for my birthday, and I had resisted it for so many years because I wanted the physical book in my hand, but I found that for business books especially, I was buying them and they would sit on my shelf forever. So now I have library access that I can get through my Kindle, which has been great. That's fantastic. You can also, there's a Kindle app on the phone too. Yeah. This has been much easier on my eyes to read, though. I will say that the Paperwhite or whatever it's called. Yeah. I have it too. Especially after having looked at a computer screen for 12 hours a day. No, I have to completely agree with you. I got a Kindle some years ago. It was like a gift to myself, and it was life-changing because I started reading again. I just forgot, with the whole routines of life and motherhood and parenthood, it just kind of gets lost somewhere in there. And so speaking of parenthood, we're always talking about
moms and the juggling act that we have to do. But I know that fathers have to do that too. I see my husband doing it all the time. So tell me, what do you do to find that integration of work and life balance? And how does it make it easier for you?
Well, yeah, it's interesting as far as work and life balance, because I think it's a huge challenge to find. And as the way I think about it is you really have to build those boundaries yourself, because nobody else will do it for you. I mean, work, clients, they will creep into every single hour that you kind of make available to them. And so, kind of from a personal standpoint, the commitment that I've made is like, unless I'm out of town, and I'm pretty much home every night for dinner at 6:00.
Mm-hmm.
That may mean that, after my kids go to bed and my wife goes to bed, I'm up doing work a couple hours later that night, but I'm going to have that time and I'm going to block it out. And I've tried to do that throughout my entire career.
Mm-hmm.
And it means I sleep less, but at the same time, it's not a trade-off that I would make for anything else. So.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's so true. And I love that there's like a couple things that you hold on to, and this is it. This is what I'm going to commit myself to. And I also truly believe that's not really a balance. It's just what is important at the time for that time. So,
yeah, and it's going to come in stages. There are certain times in any career where it's going to have to be all career for that moment in time, but make sure those moments don't take over everything else.
Yeah.
I've been very thankful for the pandemic in some respects, because I think it has made people more accepting of the fact that, yes, we do have children. Yes, we do have families. This is part of our life. We don't have to pretend that we have these segregated, aspects of our life. It's just allowed it to bleed over more. And I honestly hope that attitude at least carries through after we're all back to normal.
It just makes you more real. I mean, come on, like how many people in that law firm don't have kids or don't have a family? Like, come on. It just makes things more real, and it lightens up the energy in the room also when you accept it and just say, it is what it is. It's not like I'm still professional. I'm still doing my work. I still have the competency.
Yep.
I just have a family too, and I have emotions. So.
Well, I think back to it because so I've got 3 children now, a 13-year-old, a 9-year-old, and a 3-year-old. And like when the 13-year-old was a little baby, I was working from home. And I still remember this day, like she had cried or something like that, and it got picked up by my cell phone. And like the person on the other side was just like, is there a duck in your office? What is going on? And we were kind of like offended that this noise would creep into our call. And now here we are today, where like,
duck.
A duck.
Like, come on.
And now today, my kid could be like on a tricycle going through the back of my Zoom screen, and people would be like, okay, we're all right.
Yeah. I do like how, quarantine, COVID, all that, for a lot of people, not everybody, but has brought the simplicity back and has made it easier in some sense, and really given the slower pace has been really welcoming on our end as well. I really like it. Yeah. And the family, really focusing on the family and family time, quality time, and not just quantity. So
yeah, it made me think of something. One other thing I wanted to say about kind of the balance question is, I think you also have to think about career choices with that balance, because there have been times when I've thought about other opportunities that might be out there outside of private practice, because there are downfalls to private practice, there are good sides with private practice. But I felt that I had flexibility with my schedule in private practice that I would not find really in any other scenario, where I could say, I'm going to go to my kid's recital from 3 to 4, even if I have to sign in later. And so being conscious about that and kind of recognizing some of the impacts that even longer term career decisions may have on that, I think is helpful.
You've clearly hit the nail on the head, because I feel like one of the main reasons I started my own practice was so I had flexibility, and I wasn't subjected to somebody else telling me when and how I could be present for my children and my family. Right. And yes, there are trade-offs. Yes, there's downsides, and there's benefits to being in a bigger firm. But at the same time, I'm really, it's like such a cliche, but designing the life you want to live. But truly, I'm doing that. And I find it's such a blessing to be able to do something like that. Yep. Definitely work on my end in the sense of just for career-wise and professional-wise, making sure I'm aware of things, going to CLEs, networking, and doing all that. Where I feel like if you're in a law firm, it's a little easier because you kind of have people there. You have a little captive audience and family of your own. So, but I wouldn't trade that off, because I get to do what I need to do for my family also.
Yeah.
So I completely agree with you. Your choices. And don't be scared. Like, I love how you went from one place to another, but you was so deliberate and so intentional also. And it wasn't just, oh, I don't feel like doing this today, so I'm just going to kind of go here. But, you know, you were making very intentional choices for your career as well.
Well, and it's easy to look back at those now, and it was, but I mean, that doesn't mean they weren't terrifying decisions at the time. Each one of them were made. And I think that's important to remember that, in addition to wanting to make different career choices, there's still personal costs. There's still like people you leave behind at each place that you don't want to leave behind, but in order to kind of do things and guide your practice, sometimes you have to make those choices.
Yes. So much insight. And thank you so much for being with us today. I thoroughly enjoyed our conversation. And if somebody wants to reach out and connect with you, how do they do that?
Yeah, sure. So a couple ways. You could just send me an email. My email is tschmidt, SCHMIDT.
Right there on the bottom.
There it is. It's going to be in the notes. You could follow me on Twitter. That's at INRE, I-N-R-E, Trevor. Like I said, I don't really post a whole lot, but you could probably reach out to me because I do read it. And then, that's probably the best ways, I would say, those two ways.
Awesome. Well, everything's going to be in the show notes. If someone wants to say hi, they can. And again, thank you so much for being with us and learned so much today.
Oh, thanks, Girja. It's been so much fun.
Thank you so much for joining Law Chat with Girja. I love these kind of stories and conversations where we can be real, honest, and open, and having fun at the same time. I hope you are inspired and motivated to keep doing the amazing work you are doing. If this is something that gave you all those feels and then some, truly motivated and inspired for you, you can show your love in all or one of these ways. Be sure to give this video a thumbs up, subscribe, and share this video with your community and tell them about it, or share with somebody that can benefit from it. I look forward to seeing you next time on another episode of Law Chat, and until then, keep moving forward. Bye.